Every career advice account on the internet will tell you the secret to getting paid more is just asking with confidence. Speak clearly, make eye contact, don't apologize, and boom, you walk out with a 20% raise. Which is a little ironic, because if confidence alone determined salary outcomes, every single guy who talks over people in meetings would already be a millionaire. In reality, negotiating a salary has almost nothing to do with confidence and almost everything to do with information, timing, and leverage, which are three things nobody puts on a motivational poster because they're boring and can't be summarized in one Instagram carousel slide. So let's just get the obvious disclaimer out of the way. I'm not a recruiter, I'm not HR, and I definitely don't have the authority to approve anyone's raise, including my own. But I do have a theory, and the theory, as always, can be explained by a chart. Picture a graph with two lines. One line is how much a candidate thinks they're worth, which stays flat and confident the entire time. The other line is how much a company is actually willing to pay, and that line is a jagged, unpredictable mess that depends on budget cycles, department politics, how badly they need the role filled, and whether your future manager had a good breakfast. Most negotiation advice focuses entirely on the first line, your confidence, when really, the entire outcome is determined by the second line, which you can't see, and which almost nobody tells you how to read. So today we're going to actually learn to read it. Tip number 1, understand that the number they give you first is never the real ceiling. It's a probe. Companies don't post or offer their maximum budget for a role, because if they did, literally nobody would ever accept the minimum. Instead, most roles have a range, and the number you're offered is usually somewhere in the bottom half of that range, specifically chosen because it's the number most likely to get accepted without a fight. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just basic negotiation theory called anchoring, where whoever names a number first sets the psychological reference point for the entire rest of the conversation. If they say 70,000, your brain immediately starts negotiating around 70,000 instead of around what the role is actually worth, which might be 82 or 85. The fix here isn't to get emotional or feel insulted. The fix is to remember that the first number is a starting bid in an auction where you are the only other bidder, and you are legally allowed to counter. Tip number 2, and this is the part nobody wants to hear. You need actual data before you open your mouth, not vibes. I understand that pulling up a spreadsheet before a salary conversation doesn't feel very empowering, but neither does discovering 3 years later that your coworker with less experience than you has been making $18,000 more this whole time because he happened to negotiate and you didn't. There are entire websites now dedicated purely to anonymous, crowdsourced compensation data broken down by company, role, level, and location. Before you even think about countering an offer, you should already know the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile pay for your role at companies of a similar size. This isn't about memorizing exact numbers to recite like a hostage negotiator. It's about having a private, internal sense of what range is reasonable, so that when they lowball you, you actually know it's a lowball instead of just feeling a vague sense of unease that you talk yourself out of because you're worried about seeming greedy. Tip number 3. Never be the first person to say a specific number if you can avoid it. This sounds like it contradicts what I just said about anchoring, but it doesn't, because there's a difference between privately knowing your range and publicly announcing it. If a recruiter asks what your salary expectations are, and you say a number, you've just handed them the anchor for free. Now the entire negotiation happens below your number instead of above their real ceiling. Instead, the correct move, and I know this feels awkward the first time you do it, is to redirect the question back to them. Something like, I'd love to hear what range you have budgeted for this role first so we can make sure we're aligned. Some people online will tell you this is rude or that it makes you look evasive. It doesn't. Recruiters ask this question dozens of times a week, and deflecting it back is one of the most normal, expected responses in the entire process. The only people who feel awkward about it are candidates doing it for the first time, which, statistically, might be you. There's actually a deeper reason this works, which almost nobody explains. Every recruiter you talk to has an internal number they're hoping to land on, usually somewhere below the midpoint of the approved range, because coming in under budget makes them look good to their own manager. When you refuse to name a number first, you're not being difficult, you're just removing their ability to anchor low before you even know what the real range looks like. Think of it less like a standoff and more like two people trying to avoid being the one who says the first price at a flea market, except the flea market has a 5-figure difference between the low and high stall. Tip number 4. Treat the negotiation as a conversation about the entire compensation package, not just the base salary number, because base salary is honestly one of the least flexible parts of the offer. A lot of companies have strict internal pay bands that a hiring manager literally cannot move outside of, no matter how well you negotiate, because it would create pay inequity with everyone else at that level. But sign-on bonuses, start dates, remote work flexibility, extra vacation days, and equity are often far more flexible because they don't live inside the same rigid banding system. So if a company says they truly cannot move the base salary number, that's not necessarily the end of the conversation. That's just the end of one specific lever. You can still ask about a signing bonus to bridge the gap, or a compensation review at 6 months instead of the standard 12, or extra paid time off, which is functionally the same as a raise if you think about it in terms of hours worked per dollar earned. Most people never even attempt this second layer of negotiation because they assume once the base salary is locked, the whole conversation is over. It usually isn't. To put a number on it, let's say a company offers you $75,000 and says the base truly cannot move. If you ask for and receive a $5,000 signing bonus, plus a compensation review at 6 months instead of 12, plus an extra week of paid vacation, you've functionally captured somewhere between $4,000 and $7,000 of additional value in year one alone, all without the base salary number changing even slightly. Nobody at that company will ever tell you this is possible, because it's not really their job to maximize your offer. It's your job, and most people simply never ask. Tip number 5. Get everything in writing, especially anything that was promised verbally but wasn't in the original offer letter. This one isn't really a negotiation tactic. It's more of a protect yourself tactic, but it belongs in this list because half of all negotiation failures don't happen during the conversation. They happen months later, when someone says, "Oh, I don't actually remember agreeing to that." If a recruiter or manager verbally agrees to bump your title, adjust your start date, or revisit your salary after a certain number of months, follow up with a short, friendly email summarizing what was discussed. You're not accusing anyone of lying. You're just creating a paper trail, which, if everyone involved is acting in good faith, costs nothing and changes nothing, but if they're not acting in good faith, is the only thing that protects you later. Now, before tip number 6, I do want to bring up something that made this whole process a lot less painful for me personally, which is today's sponsor, a compensation tracking app called RaiseTrack. Most people go into a salary negotiation completely blind, not because they're bad at negotiating, but because there's no clean, centralized way to actually see what similar roles at similar companies are paying right now, today, not 2 years ago when the last salary survey came out. RaiseTrack pulls together verified compensation data specifically for your role, level, and location, and shows you a live range instead of a static number from some outdated article. You can also log your own offers privately. Track how your compensation compares over time, and get a notification if the market rate for your specific role jumps, which in this economy happens more than you'd think. Honestly, the anxiety of not knowing whether you're being lowballed is worse than actually getting lowballed, because at least once you know, you can do something about it. If you're currently job hunting or even just curious where you stand, the link is in the description, and using the code EASY gets you a free month. Tip number 6. Timing matters more than almost anyone accounts for. Companies operate on budget cycles, usually tied to fiscal quarters or the calendar year. And a department that has plenty of unspent hiring budget in October behaves completely differently than that same department trying to squeeze out one more headcount in the final week of December. If you're negotiating late in a fiscal quarter, especially the fourth quarter of a company's fiscal year, there's sometimes more room to move, because unused budget doesn't roll over, it just disappears. And managers would rather spend it on you than lose it entirely. On the other hand, if you're negotiating right after a company just announced layoffs or a hiring freeze in adjacent departments, even if your specific offer is unaffected, you'll likely get less flexibility, because everyone internally is suddenly more cautious about setting precedents. None of this is something you can control directly, but it is something you can ask about gently, by asking your recruiter how the timing looks for this particular role, which sometimes gets you more honesty than you'd expect. Tip number 7. Understand that walking away is a real option, not just a scary phrase people say in negotiation seminars. A lot of candidates treat every single job offer as though it's the only offer they will ever receive in their entire life, which creates this desperate energy that companies can feel, even if you never say it out loud. But here's the thing, if a company truly cannot get anywhere close to a fair number for the role, that's actually useful information, because it tells you something about how that company values the position, and by extension, how they might treat you once you're actually working there. I'm not saying you should walk away from every offer that isn't perfect, because no offer is ever perfect, and there's always some tension between wanting more and needing to actually pay rent this month. but you should walk into every negotiation with a clear, specific number in your head that represents your actual walkaway point, decided calmly beforehand, not decided emotionally in the middle of the call when someone tells you it's their final offer. Tip number 8, and this one applies specifically if you're negotiating a raise at your current job rather than a brand new offer. Timing your ask around a specific documented accomplishment works far better than timing it around your own personal sense that enough time has passed. Managers hear the phrase, "It's been a year since my last raise," constantly. And while it's a completely reasonable thing to bring up, it doesn't actually give them anything concrete to justify the increase to their own boss or to finance. What does work is walking in with something specific, a project you led that came in under budget, a process you improved that saved measurable hours, a client relationship you personally salvaged. The goal isn't to brag, it's to give your manager actual ammunition they can use in a conversation you're not present for. Because most raises don't get approved in the room with you. They get approved later by someone above your manager, who has never met you and only sees whatever case your manager makes on paper. Tip number 9, and the last one, don't negotiate against yourself. This sounds obvious, but it's the single most common mistake people make, and I've done it too. It happens like this. You send a counteroffer, you wait for a response, and instead of getting a response, you get silence for a day or two. In that silence, your brain starts spiraling, convincing you that you asked for too much, that they're annoyed, that you should have just accepted the first offer. Then, before they've even responded, you send a follow-up email lowering your own ask just to smooth things over. This is called negotiating against yourself, and it is the fastest possible way to lose leverage, because you're essentially bidding against an opponent who hasn't even made a move yet. Silence during a negotiation almost never means what your anxiety tells you it means. Usually it just means the recruiter is in a meeting, or waiting on approval from someone else, or dealing with 5 other candidates at the same time. Send your counter and then simply wait. The same way you'd wait for literally anything else that takes more than 1 business day to process. If you put all of this together, the actual skill of negotiating a salary isn't confidence, it's patience combined with information. You need to know your real market range before the conversation starts. You need to resist the urge to be the first person to name a number. You need to think about the entire compensation package instead of fixating on one line item. You need to document anything promised verbally. You need to understand that timing shifts what's actually possible, and you need to be willing, calmly, without drama, to walk away if the number truly doesn't work. None of this requires you to be a naturally aggressive or naturally confident person. Some of the best negotiators I've ever heard about are quiet, mild-mannered people who just happen to do their homework before the call. Confidence is the thing people notice and talk about afterward, but information is the thing that actually moves the number. Anyway, if that helped, I'm collecting donations in the form of subscribes to fund the next video.